Right. Good morning. Good morning, members, officers, and anyone who's joining us via the live stream to this meeting. Welcome to this North York Moors National Park Finance, Risk, Audit and Standards Committee. I'm Tom Hind. I'm the chair of the the chief executive of the National Park Authority. there is a Freudian slip if ever there has been, which suggests I need to get this first bit of business out of the way, doesn't it? I haven't. I've been walking in another national park this weekend. So first order of business, which falls to me to stand over, is election of chair to take office until the first meeting following the next AGM, which will be next June. So first of all, I wonder whether I can invite nominations for chair from members. David.
I'm happy to propose Colin to be elected as chairman.
Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Do I have any other nominations for chair? And Colin, can I confirm you're happy to stand?
Yes, I shall stand. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. Can I, given that there are no other, is that a nomination, George? Oh, excellent! Right. I was coming to that very item. So, given there's nobody else, no one else has been proposed to stand. I just wonder whether members can give me a show of hands just to confirm Colin's election, and I declare that to be unanimous. So, Colin, I'll dispense with my faux pas and hand over to you to chair the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much, ladies, gentlemen, and welcome to Keith and Max for coming today. Thank you very much for your confidence in me carrying on. I don't know whether that was because nobody else wanted it or the fact that we haven't done too bad of it last year. But anyway, if we can move on, election of deputy chair to take office until the first meeting of Finance, Risk and Audit Committee following the AGM of the authority. Have we any nominations, please? Clive, you, Jim?
I'm not sure if it's... I propose that Heather Morehouse does it anyway.
Yes, thank you.
I don't see.
I think Colin and I are a pretty good team.
True.
Plenty of confidence in me.
But have we any more nominations for the... Pardon?
You need a seconder first.
I have.
Oh, okay, sorry, big pardon.
Yeah. Thank you. And Heather's willing to stand, that's why asking if there's any more nominations for the post. All in favour of Heather to take office, but are you quite happy to carry on and look after me?
Well, to work together, as I say, I do make a priority because I do have obviously quite a clashes and we're trying to get these meetings sorted out for the council, but this is a priority of the finance.
Anyway, thank you very much for your support anyway, and thank you, you are duly elected. Live streaming and recording. Live streaming and recording. Inform members and members of the public that the meeting is live streamed and recorded. Emergency evacuation procedure. If there is a fire alarm, I don't know that there is one scheduled, but it will be pretty serious. If we can all congregate at the lawn out in the front of the building. Item 5, apologies for absence. I think we just have Patrick James. Have we got any other apologies? No. Thank you. Public minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of May has everybody read, and I take it this is a correct record. All in favour? Thank you. Members are reminded that it's their responsibility to declare the nature of any personal, prejudicial and or disclosable interests relating to any agenda item immediately prior to its consideration, and are encouraged to complete this form we all have in front of us, complete as a written declaration. If we move on to item 8, the internal audit programme, we have Max today to give us an update on that audit.
Thank you, Chair. So this report sets out our proposed programme of internal audit work for 24-25. The actual programme itself is summarised in Appendix B on page 10 of the report. The work programme, as in previous years, is it's risk-based, so it's aligned to the authority's risks, but it's also flexible, so it will be changed if new risks emerge during the year or the authority's priorities change. The programme itself has been prepared following discussions with both Pete and Ian, and it takes account of the authority's corporate risk register and the results of previous internal audit work in earlier years. So that, just for information, we've included the audits that we've done in the last 5 years. So those are summarised in Appendix A on page 9. As I said, the work programme is flexible, so it may change. If it does need to change, any changes will be agreed with Ian and Pete, but also will inform this committee. The programme also includes an allowance for providing advice to the authority and also undertaking follow-up work, and that's really to make sure that any agreed actions are actually implemented and address the underlying issues that we've identified. So presenting the report for approval by the committee. Thank you.
Have we any questions? I take it everybody's read and thoroughly looked at it and no? Well, thank you very much. Go on, Tom.
I think maybe just a reflection from I suppose my point of view as an officer. I mean, we internal audit, I think, is always a really important instrument in helping us look at areas where we can improve the way that we work. And I know Ian and Pete have worked closely with Max and the team at Verital to ensure that we feel that as officers we're focusing the work in the right areas. And you'll see that in particular there are 2 things that I think are worth bringing out. One is cyber security. It's top of our risk register. It's something that we feel that as a medium-sized public sector organisation, we need to ensure that we're doing what we can to understand and mitigate our risks around that. Your members will recall the presentation that we've had previously around some of the incidences that we've seen elsewhere in the local government sector, and we've certainly sought to learn from that. So we're hoping that a particular focus in that area can help us identify particular weaknesses and areas where we might improve. And then the second, which relates to, I suppose, some of those ongoing conversations about ultimately how we leverage core grant income to grow the authority and deliver more good work, is about project management. Project delivery is becoming a more significant feature of our work. It has been for a number of years. members flagged at the last FRAS committee concerns about the disconnect between numbers that were showing at Q3 and the outturn in terms of performance and project delivery. So we do think it's important that we take an external look at how we're doing and how we can improve in relation to project management, so that our systems and processes around that area are particularly robust. So I certainly commend it as a plan for members to approve.
Thanks, Tom. I had just outlined project management, which we thought what was given to us was a bit below par, because what was actually happening in the project wasn't happening. What was on the ground. When everything's on a green light and going forward, and it actually isn't there, we just wonder just how well the word is getting back to those putting the data together for us to see, and that was something we did flag up and wanted to know more about. But yes, thank you very much. Go on, Malcolm.
Yeah, just briefly, I mean, I'm very happy with these. I agree with everything that you've been saying about that. We had a really useful strategy discussion last week, members. So really told me. And one of the points that cropped up there is the way that we get on our partners. Sorry. Yeah, thanks for this. I mean, at the strategy discussion that we had last week, one of the things that cropped up was the way that we're involving partners and working with partners. And I'm not suggesting we add it to this list, but I just thought I'd highlight it now as maybe something that we want to pick up later on. Sort of an area for things for us to get better at.
No doubt. It can be something picked up on 25, 26, as this is 24, 25. Go on, Jane.
In no way does this affect the fact that I would want to approve that we do these ones, but because I'm new to this committee, I'd just like to sort of find out. So when we did 23, 24, and the results come out, and we then it goes back to the officers. Where do we see where they've changed and made the improvements from the recommendations that have happened? Is that something that you get a report on, of where they've improved from the recommendations? So when we have, say, this year, and we've got the project management, because again, exactly, that's a sort of a hot potato, if you see what I mean. How do we then sort of carry on monitoring to make sure that the risks that have been set up by your internal audit are then sort of made sure that we personally sort of monitor them in the right fashion afterwards? I suppose it's, for me, it's how to learn, if you see what I mean.
Go on, Ian.
Thanks, Jen. There's not much point to us having internal audits and a series of actions unless we actually crack on and do those things. So I think you're absolutely right to ask that. What you'll see in the audit programme is that some of the time that Max's team will spend with us is going back and scrutinising the series of actions that we brought to you and said that we would do, check that we've done them, and then in the report back, we'll have some commentary around, okay, well, the previous audit, they've done this set of things, and so you'll get confirmation via that process. But I think that's a really important part of just closing the loop, and you as members should definitely hold us to account for that.
Thank you.
Just add to it. I mean, we work closely with officers to make sure that the agreed actions are implemented. Sometimes we find that those actions can't be dealt with immediately or within the timescales that have been agreed, but we'll understand the reasons for that. If it doesn't happen here, but if we find that officers they just ignore agreed actions and don't implement them, ultimately we would escalate them to this committee, so we'd highlight those sort of issues.
And I'm very satisfied with it. I think, you're quite right. It's getting on and reacting to what's being raised, and I think we're pretty efficient at doing that, and I'm quite happy to recommend this to the committee. Thank you.
Did you propose we the recommendation to approve the internal audit plan? All in favour? Thank you. Do we have so much that we put forward to next year's audit? Has that already been done, or is it?
We can take note of that suggestion that Malcolm made around partnership working as something that we factor in the conversations through the next year with Max and the team at Veritone.
Okay, thank you. If we can move on, the Q1 finance update. Pete will give us that update now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. So this is the Q1 update, which is always, from a forecasting point of view, fairly light touch, with being so early in the year. So there's no presentation today, but I've got just a few points just to bring out of the report and highlight. The first one is that the budget for this year is 15.5 million. So that's increased since it was set in March because of some of that delays of projects last year. So the outturn report, we talked a little about some of those delays putting quite a big impact on this year in terms of the value of delivery, and that's clearly proven to be the case at 15.5 million. So clearly one for us to keep a very close eye on. Overall in the forecast, just 14,000 favourable on the bottom line, and a lot of that is to do with that light touch forecast, so it being so early in the year really for us to start actually forecasting income streams. So some of the points I'd just draw out, particularly around some of the risks around our earned income lines. So at Q1 we don't forecast that because we have the really important summer months coming, and Q2 gives us a much better idea of position. But at the end of Q1, car parking was 35,000 lower than anticipated at that point in time. Retail also then, as a result of that kind of footfall changes at the visitor centres, was also down. And then just one also to bring up is planning. So at the moment, planning looks good on the face of it, in terms of it being up against budget. But actually that contains a large application in there of over £30,000. So if you take that large application out, because we don't budget for large applications because they are so ad hoc, the underlying trend is down at the moment. So it's one to really keep a close eye on over the next 2 quarters as to how that continues. And then the other one is just interest. So interest in the MTFS, we capped at 150,000. We expect that in all likelihood to be around the £400,000 mark this year, so considerably higher. And the MTFS said that amount, the differential, would go to reserves, so we're not relying on that kind of one-off income. And a point of note, we've just seen that first reduction in the Bank of England interest rate, so we are anticipating over time that will start to go down, and that kind of just reiterates that caution around that sort of money, and not just using that and building that into our underlying base budgets, but using it as kind of almost one-off excess money we can take into reserves. So just Q2 we'll come back on things like car parking, retail, update on planning. The summer months tend to be really important. Last year we were down on things like car parking at Q1, it came back at Q2. And certainly at the moment at Q2 we are seeing recovery in areas like Danby. Certainly at the end of May the play area came in, we've seen a very busy summer there. So I think we just need to keep a close eye on that, and then when we bring back Q2 we'll probably forecast something in there. From an expenditure point of view, we do have some timing in the areas on core funding and earned funding. You'll see one of the differences we've made in the report is we've got a separate appendix for the £500,000 worth of DEFRA funding. That's just so we can continue to monitor that through the year, given the importance of the one-off nature of the funding and the need to deliver by the end of the year. At the moment, all of that's on track, but there's an update against each of those, and particularly things like Cawthorne camps and some of those where kind of that initial groundwork is happening now. we'll have an update on that at Q2, and we'll keep a close eye on making sure those funds are spent in year. In terms of savings, nothing really to note there. We've actually not got that much savings this year because a lot of our need to save this year came from Vitalise coming offline in terms of the core match fund. But one point to note is just around vacancy factor, which we continue to monitor. Core turnover of staff continues to be low, and as a result, vacancy factor might be low. So that's probably one we'll have a look at in the MTFS and budget setting as well, if we've got 2 years in a row, in which case that's falling short. Section 106, so it's early in the Section 106 year. The Section 106 year actually starts for Woodsmith at the start of May, so that's only 2 months in, as opposed to 3 months in from their perspective. We'll do a big full forecast on that at Q2. And then just one other development, we talked a little bit about the outturn and external funding issues we had at outturn, about £1.5 million underspend. So we've brought in a new appendix which covers all of the kind of projects greater than £50,000 in terms of size, and that has a commentary against it. And we've drawn out a couple of the areas of particular risk in the body of the report. One of those being the Restore project, where at the moment in the negotiations there's currently a bit of a risk as to whether that will go ahead. Revitalise, so on target, but there is the potential and known potential for some underspend there, which already has been looked at in terms of how to allocate. And then Peatland, you'll remember last year one of the big project areas was Peatland that had a big delay. That needs to be delivered this year, and at the moment the project plan is on target to deliver this year, but it has little room for slippage in the winter. A lot of the works on Peatland is in Q3, Q4 by its nature. And that takes it right to sort of the timeline at the end. So I think the majority of works are hoped to happen in Q3. At the moment it's on, but as officers we are looking at that every single month. We've also had a presentation from the project officers on that as well. So we're keeping really tight to that. But again, that's one that I've just flagged in there because that is an issue from last year and one that does have a tight delivery timeline on it for this year. In reserves, there's the reserves in there, but we've done a full review of reserves as officers. So we've had a look at all of them to see when they will spend and whether they're still intended to spend. And there's 2 of those which can be released. One is a legacy we've held now for a number of years for Land of Iron, but that's been picked up in other areas now of delivery through alternative projects, so that can be released. That's 112,000. And then the match funding reserve we created a number of years ago and we've hardly used at all. Just for a couple of EV projects. So there's a proposal to release the balance of that reserve, expected to be about 142,000 as well, and both of those to be transferred to the property reserve. So that's the proposal in the report. So I think from my perspective, there's 2 recommendations. One to note the report, which is the usual one, and the second one is about that reserves transfer. And I'd be interested about some of those developments around external funded projects and thoughts from members and whether there's anything additional that we might develop, and happy after the meeting as well if anybody's got any thoughts on that as we continue to try to develop to make sure the report addresses the needs of members to understand the financial position.
Thanks, Pete. Have we got any comments for Pete?
Just
David?
just a brief comment, Mr. Chairman. I think the drop in income from car parks of 13%, I'm quite surprised at that, because I was expecting the figure to be higher when you look at the weather we did have throughout the first 6 months of this year, which was pretty horrendous. I think it's encouraging that these figures are only up to June, so hopefully in view of the improved weather we've had and increased visitors to the national park, we shall see a changed picture much more favourable in the second half of this year. But I think, quite frankly, I think that the figures could have been much worse.
I think that's right. Yeah, I mean, I think certainly May was a particularly bad month, and I think also Easter covering March to April as well. So we only had sort of the back end of Easter within this financial year, but May in particular was particularly poor. June saw a little bit of recovery. So yeah, absolutely. And I'm keeping all fingers and toes crossed through August, where we have seen some good weather and school holidays, and Danby absolutely thriving. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much for this, Pete. Again, I'm probably asking questions that you all know the answer. So if the planning is where it is, what is our costs? What are our personnel and the costs of us that we're running our planning? You know, is it something, if planning is going down, is it a way that we can maybe add an extra service that's a paid service or something? I don't know. Do you see what I mean? Or what is what it costs us to put on the planning, which is obviously we have to, versus what we're getting is really what I was trying to find out as one question.
It's a really good question and one that we need to monitor all the time. So we've seen planning. One of the big challenges, I think, whether you're a council or whether you're a national park, is trying to monitor planning, which goes up and down. So sometimes you can have boom years, and sometimes you can see this trend we're seeing at the moment, which is that reduction in larger applications, but still large volumes of householder level applications. And actually, those householder level applications are lower value, but still take a lot of work time to actually do. So we continue to work with Chris to understand about resourcing the team, the resource levels needed to deliver that amount of work. But it's always difficult. You don't know when it's going to necessarily change. And at the moment, recruiting planners is particularly challenging, I think, for all sectors. There is a shortage of planners. We do very well as an authority to have the number of planners, graduate planner scheme that grow our own. There's always that risk if you chop and change and take people out too early that you may struggle to get people back into posts where we've got good people. So it's something we continually monitor as a leadership team in association, but those long-term trends are absolutely things we need to keep an eye on in association with the cost of delivery.
Knowing that that is a problem and know what a great team we have, I suppose what I was asking is that other things that they can do to add value is really what I was thinking in this thing, so that we didn't lose them. Do you see what I mean? Is what I was trying to see if there was a different way around it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, it's something for us to look at. And I think at times we have had planning officers getting involved in projects outside of planning to enhance experience and bring that integration. And that's certainly one thing we can do, is use their skills and adopt them across into project management, where we may want to flex resource into more value added, not necessarily income driving, but certainly in other areas of resource. And I think Ian's come across, because resource management around these kind of things is absolutely one of the big challenges.
Ian, carry on. Thanks, Chair. We do make efforts to sell our resources, for want of a better expression, and so our building conservation person who's based in planning is doing some work with the Yorkshire Dales at the moment, which we obviously charge out their time and make a small profit from that. And one or two other members of the planning team, when we're able to, and so the head of development management, for example, has done paid work for other authorities, and so we do try and do that wherever we can. It's quite a tricky thing, because in an ideal world we would match our staffing month on month exactly with our planning workload, but it's not quite that simple to do. So, but in answer to your question, yes, we are trying to find paid ways of engaging the
so we can keep them.
Yes, so we can keep them.
Good.
Please.
Yeah. Sorry, we're going back to car parking, and I think David touched on it. But I mean, I was very interested to look at it's only 5% drop on the Rosebery Topping one, and it was interesting to know that that was a good decision we made a couple of years ago, because at one stage we were looking at selling that off, and I'm glad that we didn't, and we've invested in it. It'd be interesting to know. Did it open? And because we did quite a bit of work on there, and obviously part of it hasn't been open for the full quarter. Would that be right in saying so? That so really the figure could be even, it's only just opened. They hadn't had the full quarterly opening. Is that right?
Yeah, so we had some partial closures. I don't know if you can hear this. There's three microphones on.
It doesn't matter. It's just indicating that
it's
better than it looks.
But there was some partial closures. We did the work to increase the number of spaces there as well, and we've enhanced the car park, and absolutely it continues to perform as one of our best performing car parks. So really validates the decision, one, to increase the number of spaces. And yes, underlying that performance is probably more like on budget.
It's probably not as low as that. So that was good decision making when we made that.
Absolutely.
I struggled to look at this. Somewhere along here, were you talking about something to do with Gothland? can't find about it. It was something that was leaning over from another area. Sorry, I've read through
I
it.
think that will it be an expenditure where the money that we
Explain
owe.
that to me, please, because I don't understand what it's for.
Yeah, so the arrangement with Goatland is that we share that car park in terms of profitability. So the profits, and then we pay an element back as part of expenditure, as part of that share of that car park land.
Okay.
The comment in the report is that money that's owed is still outstanding. So we're still waiting for the invoice for that. So we have a timing issue in expenditure, where we expected that to go out in Q1 of this year. We accrued it into last year.
I see.
It hasn't gone out yet, so it looks odd in the numbers, but that will iron out by Q2. So it's just an expenditure timing issue.
Okay, and sorry to lead on from that, but do we actually share the costs of repairs on that, or is it? Is that
I can come back with what the full arrangement is. I'm not aware of the full arrangement.
We get half the profits.
I think we take the full maintenance, but I think by being able to use the land for the car park, we have an arrangement in terms of share of.
Okay, that's probably
share of
another reason.
profitability.
But thank you for that. Thank you.
Jim?
Sure. Just on the budget, I know it's a carryover that's kind of instigated that, but I think it's still our biggest budget ever, isn't it? So well done to all for that. I mean, 15 million off a 4.5 million grant is pretty good value for the taxpayers' money, I would be saying. So well done for that. Let's make sure that we get it spent. And comment on the car park. I think, given that our car parks are a really important income earner for us, and I don't think that the figures for Danby and those, as members have said, really reflect the picture, because it feels like later in the year those are going to catch up. Looking at Hutton the Hole too, I just wonder if we're thinking about matching our offer, to our car parks, and just to have a think about, what is there for people to do when they come to our car parks? Can we actually tailor, the offers that are available to those places? And it would be a win-win, wouldn't it? Engaging more people, getting them out and about in health and well-being terms, and gaining us money too. I just wonder whether, particularly at Hutton the Hole and perhaps Thornton the Dale, we could sort of try and match a bigger offer as to what people might do when they come there. And I know, electric charging points are a great thing, aren't they? So I don't know if we're making a lot of that in our promotion, but that's my comment really. If there's something really exciting to do near our car parks, that's going to help, isn't it? So just a comment really to think about that.
Thanks, Jim. Yes, I do believe the Gromont one will be a long way down this time as well, with the bridge being shut and all the incoming trade that did come in won't be coming in now. And that goes on to about November, I think, when they say they go. Sorry. George, do you want to?
Yes. Thank you, Chair. It's just the point that we should, given the trend we've seen now, hopefully it's not a trend, it's just a blip, but hopefully the trend will be an increase in terms of the revenues that we generate as an authority. But we're still early on in the year to know what is going to happen. But I understand that the team are looking at it, monitoring it closely. But it is just a reminder, this blip, that we should always keep our focus on investing, finding new ideas, trying to improve our assets to attract more people to come to the national park, and at the same time, of course, focus on our second purpose as a national park. And this is where our focus as an authority should be, and we should not be distracted by other things that sometimes might take an amount of investment and time and might not lead us to achieve what we are set up to deliver. So this is just a reminder, but hopefully trend will continue to recover, and this is just a blip, but it serves a good reminder to concentrate our focus on delivering the purposes of the national park.
Malcolm?
Yeah, thanks. Just 2 points, Pete. You mentioned that we were switching the match funding reserve, I think, to the general reserve because we haven't used it. I mean, historically, we created that so that when one major scheme finished, we actually had something in the budget so we could do another one. Where are we getting the match? I mean, don't we need match funding, or in future is it going to come from the general reserve, or kind of what's changed to mean that we don't need that specific amount for future big projects sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we set it aside, I think it must be 4 or 5 years ago, at a point at which Section 106 wasn't matching in the same way as it is now. External funding is getting more complex in terms of a lot of match fund might come from other partners within external funding projects. So where you've got multiple partners, sometimes the match is coming from there. And quite often we're finding that match is in people time rather than cash. So what we have tended to find over the years is actually that 300,000 hasn't been used. I think we've had 1 or 2 occasions with EV, where EV projects in car parks we've used it. Because it's there to be used, but actually for 5 years really it's been untouched until this year is the first time we've drawn down from it. So a lot of the time these big landscape style projects, when we put it aside, it was when we knew revitalised Land of Iron with the 2 we were running, they were going to come to an end, or Land of Iron was going to come to an end. But actually it's other sources of income really that have ended up driving that match funding rather than the reserve. And it's ended up sitting there unallocated and unused. All the other reserves that we went through, apart from the Land of Iron reserve, have got purposes and are allocated and are being delivered, whereas that one really didn't have any kind of earmarking at all. And there weren't any projects in the pipeline where we were looking to match fund from them either. So the decision was taken by officers to bring to this authority the release of the balance of that reserve for that reason, really, because there was no kind of intention or plans to use it. And it's the property reserve rather than general reserve, which is the recommendation, to release it to that.
I suppose you just need to recognise that it is a risk. If there is a big project that comes up that does require significant finance, then
we'd need to see that from elsewhere.
The general reserve isn't actually for that sort of purpose necessarily. Okay, well, let's do it. I was just interested in what's changed and why. The other point I'm just going to make is a more parochial one about Chopgate. I mean, I'm interested that the car park's the only one that makes a loss. Is the lack of a mobile phone signal? I mean, we've been without mobile phone signals in Bilsdale for the last 3 years because of the mast fire and all that sort of stuff, and we're desperately trying to get that situation reversed as soon as possible still. But is the fact that the people who park there can't get a mobile phone signal, is that part of the reason why we're not getting the sort of income that we should do? I'm assuming it is part.
It may have a part effect, but I think it's the lack of footfall to that car park that's the biggest driver. So there may be a part effect we can have a look at to see whether the mobile signal is part of the impact. But I think we've always traditionally not had a great footfall to that particular car park.
I mean, there's nothing you can do about mobile phone signal other than encourage the providers to get on and
indeed
put the stuff on the
mast. Not in our hands, that one, apart from maybe
what we do. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Just on that, match funding, do we still keep the number of hours for actual workforce so we can put it against match funding, or is that not the case anymore? Because I know the railway do match funding on time, voluntary time put in, and is that the case of what we do, or is it not?
So when we do match funding, it's done at the time at which you take out the external funding application. So an application will come, it might say, right, we need 20% match funding for this project. So we'll provide 80% of the funding, you need to provide 20%. And there's various avenues then you can look at for that. So Section 106 has been one of them for some of the bigger projects. We've equally been able to match from, like say, staff time sometimes. So if we put in 10%, 15% of our officer time, that can often be used as like time instead of cash, in effect, the value of that. And equally, sometimes we've been able to bring external partners in as part of that match. So it doesn't necessarily have to be us that match, but 20% of the value has to be matched. So if we can bring in another partner, sometimes that can act as match. So it really does vary from external application to external application and from body to body, depending who the funder is. But over the last few years, we've always found one of those other routes as being the source of match funding. With just, like I said, one or two exceptions within sort of the electric vehicle charging, where we have gone to that reserve. But that's purely because that reserve was an option. I think in the majority of cases, we found match funding has come from other sources.
Christine.
Thank you. So two areas where I wanted to ask questions, Pete. One is the section 106. Just on the basis that the carry forward is not really diminishing, and when we look across the budget overall, it's just I mean, I guess personally it's a source of frustration in the sense that it's a huge sum of money that we've got available to us to do good works, and we haven't been able to fully take advantage of that. I wonder if you could say something about those rollover rules. Are we starting to get in any danger of losing money? And just from a finance point of view, I realise Brian, he's not here to comment about this. But from a financial point of view, the issues of do you see a way of us getting through some of that rollover? And the second thing was around the reserves. Really, I think you'd mentioned in a different forum that we were trying to increase the amount of reserves overall, and I just wonder how far off we are from kind of reaching what you consider to be a safe level of reserve.
Okay, so taking each of those in turn. So section 106 at the moment, from a financial appraisal point of view, the value that we're behind is no more. I think in core policy D, it's just over a year. In all of the others, it's under that period of time, and it's a 3-year payback period. So at the moment, we're not close to risk. I'd also point out from an external audit point of view, it's an area that they really major on every year. So and you'll remember maybe from 2 or 3 years ago in Grant Thornton, we're kind of highlighting that core policy D risk. And in the time since then, we've actually overspent in the last 2 years on core policy D, and are likely to probably this year as well. So I think from a financial point of view, the risk is really minimal at the moment, but it's absolutely something we should keep an eye on. In terms of section 106 forecast at Q1, there hasn't really been a forecast at the moment, purely because they're only 2 months in. It's very early stage, but Q2 there'll be a proper forecast, and that will probably give a better idea of this year's spend and the carry forward forecast. So that's one to look out for. Remind me of the second question.
Thank you. On the section 106, and I should just add the frustration's not about officers, because I recognise they're working very hard. It's just about the numbers. The second question was around kind of what our target is for the reserve. Obviously, we're adding some funding to that. Is that bringing us up to kind of what you consider to be a safe endpoint for the figure on the reserve?
Yeah, so our total reserve is not so much our total reserves position, but the risk reserves. So there's 2 risk reserves in there. One is the general working balance reserve, and one is the contingency reserve. So it's those 2 really that the medium-term financial strategy highlighted in the next couple of years, trying to get those to about 10% of our expenditure, less section 106, because section 106 has its own protections. So in respect of that, at the moment, it's about 7.5% to 8%, I think. It's one that we continually have to monitor. And I think when we bring the medium-term financial strategy report in November, that will look at that again in detail. So one of the things that strategy report commits to do is to have a look at the reserves position, have a look at the risk position, and reassess that every single year to make sure it's right, and probably to highlight then how far off we are. And that probably indicates whether or not there's anything we need to do to top up. In some ways, that last year we had that bit of underspend of 300, and we were able to put 100 towards that reserve to help bring that up. That might be the natural way we want to try to do it, but equally we want to be careful that we don't underspend, because that's really not what we want to be doing. We want to put it into what it's supposed to be going into. But I think last year, you'll remember, quite a bit of that 301, about half of it was income stream achievement rather than underspend necessarily. So if our income streams overachieve, that gives us that option to maybe top those reserves up. But I think Q2 is a good position to take a view, because some of the income streams aren't looking as healthy at Q1. But yes, hoping with a good summer that will have turned around by the time we report in November for Q2.
Thank you very much, Pete. In the reserves, I know again at our meeting, that when we had our strategy meeting last week, we talked a lot about well-being and getting people into the parks and using what the sort of our one of our core beings is about. And when I attended the last well-being subcommittee, we were given some amazing presentations of things that were being sort of piloted, but there was no funding for us to be able to really use them, or to be able to, for the officers to be able to continue, and for us to potentially do good works in that area. So what I'm wondering is, I can't see in this reserves anybody looking at going towards something that in a committee meeting was considered to be a really important way to go forward with using some of our funds.
Yeah, in terms of what is in, I'm not sure what came out in terms of those proposals and whether or not they're high value proposals that we're looking for external funding opportunities for, or whether or not they are lower level options that we could do in terms of putting those funds into. So maybe just a need to understand that a little bit more. But if it's sort of the larger scale projects where we need to go out to find a fund that's out there, the work that Ellen does, where she goes and looks for funds that will fund things of high value, reserves won't really cover those things. They might reserves cover smaller areas or be able to match fund smaller areas.
I would have thought of a fund
It's about
like
those
that
bigger
would be able
funds
to
maybe.
produce a good match fund. So that's why I'm saying, if we've got 112 or whatever potential match fund, we should perhaps really consider, do we not need it to match fund for this area that is a new growing area within what we're doing within our sort of, statutory second area. And again, it came out in the meeting last week that this was an area we really need to work on. And so that's why before we just bung it anywhere, I'm concerned that have we really?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously I was at the Recreation and Wellbeing Forum, so I have some recollection of the discussion that we had and the comments that were made as well, Jane. I think the idea in principle of allocating some funding from reserves in order to provide some match to a project in the health and wellbeing space, I don't think there's any particular challenge with that. The question really is whether we should allocate or ring fence reserves on an unallocated basis without having a project idea in the pipeline. And I think a question probably to raise in the external funding section when we get there is, as Pete says, in order to kind of deliver a really significant piece of work around health and wellbeing, we'd have to seek external funding for it and partnerships for it. And I think really probably the challenge to us as officers is whether we're focusing enough attention in developing the kind of project pipeline that enables us to go after funding in the health and wellbeing space. It is a challenge area, particularly trying to get traction with NHS partners. We've had a little bit of success latterly in collaboration with the North York Moors National Park Trust in relation to the Nature Prescriptions project. Relatively small project in overall cost. So I think the challenge really for us is, have we got a pipeline of ideas and proposals in relation to health and wellbeing, which it would be appropriate then for us to allocate some, whether it's staff time or funding, in reserve in order to attract a bigger bid. I think there's a little bit more work to do around the pipeline.
Any more comments? Could I just bring two up? I see we've built a little wall back up around the it's around the pay machine, I believe, and whatever is written on the floor. Are we extending that up and down the roadside just to make it look more as though it's something that hasn't just been plonked there, and it's part of the countryside? And I saw we'd put forward 4,000 for it. We've only spent 3.5, but I believe there was an insurance claim for 6 or 7 for the previous one. Is that going into reserves, or where's that one going?
I'll let Ian come over initially for the insurance claim because I'm not sure where that one's at the moment. I think in terms of the piece of work that's been done, I don't think there's a plan to extend that at the moment. I think in some ways it's when you go to the pay machine and actually that's the point you cross the road as well. So you kind of go through there, or you should do unless you go across in a different place. But in theory, that should be where people are crossing the road in order to be able to access the other side. So it does kind of funnel you through that particular position. So as far as I'm aware, there's no purposes to expand that. And I'll let Ian answer the insurance question.
There was no insurance claim, Colin, because the structure on the car park was not insurable, and so we've due to that act of vandalism, we've had to stand the loss and rebuild that at our cost.
Okay. No, I thought you said at one time there was an insurance claim put in.
We were trying it on, but then I knew we weren't covered.
Yeah. Another one. We did put through at Frask. I don't think it was the last one. Probably the one before, where we put 30,000 through from reserves for the zip wire. Now, you did inform us that there was 2 legacies given to the park from 2, I believe they were people's wills or something like this, which originally this wasn't able to come to the authority when, you know, that the 340 came and the trust was formed to look after that. Now, as the situation changed where the authority can claim these, or was that just a one-off, or, you know, what's the situation now?
So it's a double act again. I'll just take the first bit, which is just around how the 30,000 for the zip wires. So that was an extended from the DEFRA funding that we received. The 30,000 was then came from one of the legacies, not from reserves. It came from one of the legacies that we are seeing. And I'll hand over to Ian because I know we've got 3 legacies, but he's probably got a better update on where they are.
The legacies that we have were specifically to the authority, whereas the legacy that you refer to was specifically to the North York Moors Trust. So they are different. There's nothing that stops the authority as a public body from receiving a legacy.
Okay.
And we're in the fortunate position of having 3 at the moment. 2 we understand the value of. The other we know the percentage of the estate that we'll get, but we don't know the value of the estate as yet.
Right. Okay. So the land slip at Leversham, I take it that's still okay, and we're just waiting for nothing to happen and pull out the electric.
It's still hanging on there. No, but as members will be aware, we've got an ongoing issue with the landslip on our estate that is adjacent to the North Yorkshire Moors Railway. We've talked about this a number of times. We've now got our electronic monitoring on site, and what that does is it monitors any movement in land of the land, and that goes directly both to an engineering consultancy and to the North Yorkshire Moors Railway. So if there's any significant movement at any point, the engineers at NYMNPA can make a swift decision about whether to continue running their services or not. I think slightly to everybody's surprise that the slip has barely moved at all, despite the very heavy rainfall we had over the winter months.
Good news. No more comments. Clive?
Thank you. It's back to the centres, and you were saying that they're going to have a new strategy on income. What is this strategy, and what sort of percentage increase in sales are you anticipating from it?
So that's a group that are underway at the moment who are looking into that because of, I think, underperformance in recent years around retail. So that's currently looking at that. That will come to members at some stage in terms of the results of that. We will be looking at improved performance around understanding what's sold there, the margins that we do make on products, things like old stock and how we address old stock issues. So there's a number of facets in there, I think, and then also equally just a strategy about how we drive people to the visitor centres and then through the visitor centres and retail. So it covers quite a few broad points, but I think until that piece of work actually concludes and we bring that to members, then that will bring out the information about what performance increases we expect to see, why and where from. But I think there's a number of strands of performance that can be improved, which will come out at an end result, but there's a few different areas that feed into that. So we'll certainly be bringing that to members when that concludes to say what's going to be happening.
Heather,
Yeah.
last one.
Yeah, I was going to actually talk about this in the next agenda item, but seeing we might as well wrap it all in one go. I think on our catch-up meeting, I did say that I visited Danby Lodge with my grandchildren. It was absolutely packed out. They'd run out of ice cream, but the Sutton Bank had sent some more over. The staff were in good form, they were all happy. But they did say they felt, this is in the cafe particularly, there should be a bit more indication that they're there. This is something to look at. That I said, we don't particularly like a lot of signs everywhere, but I said, look, we want people to know we're here. But it nevertheless, there was a queue. But having said that, they felt that you know when you're on the zip wire thing, you don't know that there is a cafe. And yeah, it was very good. And as I say, I was going to talk about in the next agenda item, but I think you've seen a massive increase there. It's been a total success. The weather does help, but having said that, it's the sort of place where kids can go, where it's not muddy and they're having a great time. And I think if you're looking at that's, I mean, I'm not sure about in the shop, but I think it was all about ice cream, cakes and whatever. And yeah, I think that's something they wanted, because a bit more that we're here, the cafe's there. But I could only comment on what was going on up at Danby. But I think as I made the point, the figures will look very, very encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
I think it's worth mentioning that Danby has been a great success worth mentioning that Danby has been sort of since that play area, we've seen a really big change in footfall, but it's a project halfway through. So the play area is one of the first instalments, but there's another set of things to come, which will include things like signage, but also the mindfulness area and various other things. There's a few more developments to come over the next few months to look out for too.
Thank you, and engage with the staff. I think you'll be doing that, but they were very, very, very upbeat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, ladies and gentlemen, recommendations. Members note the content of the report, and members approve the release of the balance of match funding and land of iron reserves to the property reserves. All in favour? Thanking you. If we can move on to the quarterly performance card. Thank you, Paul. The floor is yours.
Good morning, members. This is the regular update to each of these meetings on the performance scorecard, which goes to senior leadership team. It tracks 13 key performance indicators. So it's basically a snapshot on how we're getting on as an authority. It's a chance for you to see how we're getting on and scrutinise performance and quiz officers. Of the 13 indicators, 5 are slightly off track, but we think there's good reasons and no reason to particularly worry. I think we've covered some of them already, but just to run through them quickly. Social media reach has dropped for engagements over the first quarter, but it's gone up for impressions and video views. Visitor centre footfall at Danby has been down, as we've just discussed, but again, we think there's good reasons. We obviously didn't have a playground over that particular quarter, and the weather was terrible. Lucas and team do track performance month by month. We know that since June it's been going up, so we think that's a temporary blip. Next one's planning appeals, slightly below again, but I think the first thing to say is we get very few planning appeals in the first place, and it's only slightly behind target, and I know we've won a couple since, so again we expect that one to be back on track fairly soon. Volunteering, we've had an issue around tracking volunteering performance. We've been working with Ian to try and get some new figures. We're not quite there yet, but at the next meeting we'll have a revised way of reviewing figures on that. And again, for the final one, again, we've discussed it already, but section 106 spend on landscape projects. Again, down compared to the last quarter, but looking at what happened last year, we think it's going to get back on track in terms of the profiling for the year. And the final thing to say is at the last meeting, you did ask us to put some information in about project performance as well. So the very last thing in the report is the officer's assessment against how we're getting on in terms of project delivery, in terms of whether things are on track. The only one that's flagged up is, as read, is the Restore project, which again we've covered already. There is some information in the previous item, Appendix 4, on financial performance, but I'll be working with Pete to make sure there's a slightly better way of presenting that in the scorecard next time round, so you can kind of get an overview very quickly on how we're going in terms of profile against spend as well. Which point I'll open it up to questions.
Any questions?
Can you just clarify the changes in volunteering monitoring sort of thing? I mean, we seem to have been changing it a fair bit over the last sort of couple of years or so. When you come up with this new way of measuring it, will you be able to get the same measure for the previous years, so we've got a reasonable trend? Because the important thing about volunteering is it's partly just how much is it, and I know the way you measure the volunteer days has changed and all this sort of stuff. I mean, I remember when we used to talk about 10,000 or 11,000 days. And I don't want to get into the details of it. I think the only point I want to make is that whatever the method you're coming up with, will you then be able to say, and that particular measure has got better or worse over the last few years? In other words, are you going back retrospectively to work out what that number would have been previously, so we can continue to see what's going on?
Yes, we'll definitely be able to give you a clue as to whether the direction of travel in volunteering is gradual improvement or static or whatever it might be. Otherwise, on its own, it doesn't provide you with any helpful information until we've got 2 or 3 years worth in the bank.
That's why I was asking.
I know. So yes, we will have a look back.
Yeah. Okay.
Any more comments? Come on, Jim.
That's it. It's just, as you say, some time ago we have a volunteering strategy. It's quite a long time since I've seen it, but I just think, making sure that volunteering is in a good place going forward is crucial to our ability to deliver health and well-being. It's probably one of our biggest assets in health and well-being, and various other things too. And so I just wonder quite where our crystal ball profile for volunteering in the medium term is, and whether we're thinking about that strategically.
It's certainly a little while since we brought members a paper specifically on the subject of volunteering, so I'm more than happy for us to do that at next FASC or a future NPA.
I wouldn't really want to see a paper for paper's sake. It was more making sure that we're heading in a positive direction, medium term. Yeah. So, but if that's a way of doing that, I'd do that.
Yeah, just a couple of points to add. I mean, I think Jim's right that the volunteering is integral to our health and wellbeing delivery as a national park authority, and it's a reason why we do track it as a KPI. It's a good proxy indicator of our performance and our delivery as an organisation, and appropriately continue to do that. That there are, I mean, some things we need to, I think, bear in mind as well about how this plays out, how it plays out nationally. New Targets and Outcomes Framework has a series of indicators, what we call Access for All indicators, which includes volunteering. So we need to make sure we're continuing to track on a consistent basis that enables us to report against that. I think the wider strategic point about volunteering plays into a broader question about volunteering across the national park, not just with the National Park Authority, and that may be something that we ought to reasonably take a look at as well about how we build better partnerships and coalitions of organisations like the National Trust and others that are involved in volunteering in the National Park.
I know it's difficult putting all these figures together. I know it's just been plonked on you, Paul, to do this, but how long does it take, or do you have to go around every member of staff to see just what, you know, you put in this scorecard to try and get it as near right as you can, and you know, how does that work?
Yes, is a straightforward answer. The good news, we've just appointed somebody to take this work over from us. So from November, we're getting somebody called Kate who's coming in. We're sharing it with the Dells. So I'll be passing this work on to somebody probably who's a little bit better with numbers than I am. But yeah, in answer to your question, it does take a bit of time. We should have you appointed at office, and yes, there is a bit of chasing up involved.
Right, thank you.
But again, if just any input from members in terms of how we're presenting this and whether the indicators are right is greatly appreciated, because it is evolving over time.
And I think maybe just to pick up on that as well, and I've made the point previously in this group, I think it's important that we monitor and measure ourselves qualitatively as an organisation, but we do have some quantitative metrics beyond just the finance metrics that give us indications of how we're doing. So I feel it's important that we have a set of KPIs, and I sense that we're getting now to slightly more set of consistent key performance indicators, although we always need to iterate that. But Paul's point and Colin's chair's question about making sure this is adding value and it's additive, I think is important. So it is incumbent then on members, I think, to make sure that we do use this and treat it as a scrutiny item. But also, if it's not adding value to you, do tell us, because I don't want either myself or officers to be producing information that is not adding value. I think, like I say, we're getting to a slightly better position than we were maybe 18 months ago with the scorecard. But it has to tell us something meaningful about how we're doing as an organisation that helps you oversee and scrutinise our performance and delivery as a group of officers.
Thank you. Well, if we don't see you at the December meeting, Paul, thank you very much for you'll be running as far away as you can get. I believe it's Katie that's coming in, and we're sharing her with the Dales National Park, is it, to do the job on both national parks. But anyway, thank you very much. And the recommendation, members, is to note the scorecard. We'll move on to item 11, the annual governance statement.
Okay.
Ian, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, as you'll be aware, each year we have to produce an annual governance statement, and this sits with our statement of final accounts, which will come to you later in the year. But we always like to give an early sighting of our draft annual governance statement to allow you to make any comments before our external auditors have a look at it. It does pretty much what it says on the tin. We need to outline the way in which the authority is governed, the checks and balances in place. We've updated it in minor ways this year to take account of the changes we made following the governance review, but the document should be one that you're familiar with. We report in part 4 of the report on the actions that we said we would take last year, and there's some commentary within that on the changes we've made. And we've also suggested a couple of governance related actions for this year in part 5 of the report. Now, Keith, as our independent person, has had sight of an early draft of this and has had some input, and we've made a number of changes as a result of Keith's input. So I don't propose going through it in any detail, but I'd be very happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions, members? Thank you, Ian. All read and digested. Thank you. The recommendation that members review the draft annual governance statement attached at Appendix 1 and make any suggestions for amendment to be incorporated into the accounts for approval in November. All in favour of? Thank you very much. Thank you, Ian. We move on to remind. You're on now, Helen. If we move on to item 12, which Helen has just come to give us her report. And, get settled. You're okay.
Thank you. Hi all.
Thank you.
So yes, just wanting to give the usual summary of where we're at the moment. So table 1 is a good sort of picture of what's been happening. So for this financial year, we're over the target quite considerably because of the move of spend from the previous financial year. And we reached our target so far, and then we're due to work quite a lot considerably into 25-26 and onwards, but I'll go through that in a moment, how we're going to support that process. So the profile is looking quite healthy, but the picture is at the moment that we're working on a Heritage Lottery Fund application called More Connected. I referred to it in the last paper in May, but it's quite a considerable amount of work. So we're looking at around £10 million project over 10 years with the Heritage Lottery, and they've opened up a new funding programme called Landscape Connections, which the project will fit nicely into now. So that project will work with nature and communities, but we're going to use the rights of way, such as the Cleveland Way and the Coast to Coast as sort of nature corridors, but also improving access to nature for communities, making sure that people engage with those routes. So that would consist of improving the nature corridors, improving access and engagement with targeted activities, also celebrating the heritage along those routes, and also providing a small grant fund to communities, sort of around 300 up to £1,000 grants that people can apply for, because the Heritage Lottery Fund really struggle to get small grants out to local communities that don't usually apply for their funding. So that's a really exciting project that we're working on at the moment. The profile for that project is after the business plan timescale. So as you'll see in table 1, the grey area is for the first 2 years of that project, but the first 2 years of that project is just the development stage of the project. The actual delivery will be after the business plan timescale. So we're looking at around about £1 million or so after that for each of that year of the project over the further 8 years. We're quite positive of that application. The Heritage Lottery are very keen. They said it's ours to lose, really, so we're quite positive for that to happen. And then we are working on the Danby Lodge improvements, which is a new observatory. So we're through to the second stage with the Wolfson Foundation, which we haven't applied to before, but they have a science programme. So we're hoping that that will be a successful application. We don't know how much that will be, because Wolfson decide, once we submit the application, they decide how much they would contribute to that rather than us requesting a specific amount. So that's a bit of a snapshot of proposals that we are submitting at the moment. Moving on to point 4 about the applications that we have had successes with. The Pollinators project is a lovely project to improve habitats along the beelines routes. So we have secured funding from Santander through National Parks Partnerships, which connect you with corporate partners, and we were one of the successful ones for that. We've also had funding from DEFRA's Nights Under the Stars programme, so to support children from underserved communities to engage with the National Park, which is around 95,000. So that's a very nice couple of projects that have recently been funded. And then working into the future, as I've mentioned previously before, we have lots of potential projects in the pipeline. So there's around 50 projects or so that we have ideas that we try and match with funders. But specifically, I've given you some sort of proposals there in point 5. So things around cycling, the health and wellbeing strategy, Bransdale Conservation Management Plan, and also continuing the peat restoration projects is sort of the key projects that we want to support with funding in the future to hopefully meet our target. And then table 2 highlights those applications which have been submitted but we're waiting a decision on. As I've mentioned already, the observatory and more connected with the heritage. We're also waiting on a grant agreement for the Rosebery topping project from the Landscape Enhancement Initiative. So National Grid have funded us quite healthily over the past, so we've got a really good relationship with them. But we've been stretching their ideas of where they would fund projects in the national park, and we asked them if they would support funding a project around Rosebery topping, which they wouldn't normally fund because it doesn't have a huge, the pylons don't have a huge impact on the landscape around Rosebery, but they have agreed actually that that will be a new area that they would fund in the future. So hopefully new projects for that will come out as well after this one. And then we're waiting on the Arts Council bid. So there's only a small pot of money of around 35,000, but we should hear at the beginning of September for that. And then the test and trials is currently paused at the moment with the changing government. And then table 3 shows you what's recently been funded. So as I've mentioned, the DEFRA funding for Nights Under the Stars. And then I've reported previously before about the Reconnect project that we had funding from the National Lottery Community Fund for. And then we've had a couple of recent pots of money, just small bits to support the young people's work, so the Young Explorers and also the Youth Voice projects. And I've already mentioned the pollinators. And then point 6 just goes through the risks, really. I just wanted to highlight some of the considerations that we've been mulling over the last few months. So with monitoring and an evaluation, it's sort of becoming a bit overburdensome for some staff. So we're just making sure that we really assess before we put an application in what is the responsibilities for us for monitoring and evaluation tasks during the lifetime of a project. And now we're making sure that we cost in that as a staff cost during the application process, rather than it being a shock once we have the funding in place. Especially for the smaller grants, often it can be out of proportion for what work has been done. So we making sure that that's properly assessed during application process. And also wanted to raise around the resources that we need to have in place to actually submit the applications. So using the Heritage Lottery Fund application as a bit of a case study for that. We're putting in really good solid processes now to make sure that staff are really aware of how much work is going to be their responsibility during the application process, and making sure that we put in place all the mechanisms that we can to make sure it's not too much taking away from their core delivery work. So making sure that we have a really tight working group. Not everybody is involved in the nitty-gritty of an application form, but having a working group working on it. Offering consultants to come in to take over their work should it become too much for them. and making sure that directors are fully aware of where those pressure points are and meeting with them regularly to make sure that it doesn't become over the top. So that's a really important thing, but because we've been so successful with funding recently as an organisation, everyone's really excited to keep maintaining the work on funding applications, which is good for staff morale. So everyone's very enthusiastic about More Connected, the Heritage Lottery Fund application. Lots of ideas are coming on board with what we can do with that work over the next 10 years. And then also just wanted to raise that even though we have got a couple of smaller bids, such as the Arts Council money and the Ganton Education Trust money, it's really important to continue those sort of small pots of money so then we can maintain that relationship with the funder, and then that relationship can be enhanced in future years, so we can keep increasing the ask in future years, so then it's worth the time that you've put in over the years or so. And then I've just said what the financial, the staffing implications are. So we've got some new staffing coming on post because of recent funding, and just saying that I've now put in a colour-coded key, so then you can see on the tables what each management plan outcome is being achieved with each of the projects. And that's it.
Thank you, Helen. Yes, the work that's put in is absolutely mind-boggling, really. And congratulations to you and all the authorities team for the input. Without everyone pulling together, we wouldn't get these big projects put forward. Heather.
Yeah, just to reconfirm, it's exhausting work. I mean, I had to fill a few forms in the past. I hate doing them, and it's not just that. I mean, it's keeping everything alive and going. I said, as Colin said, you have to be extremely proud of what you've done in the team. And I just want to go back and look at one of them, the one where you've got expression of interest, which you talked about, the More Connected. What a bonus that would be. This would solve some of the funding issues we're talking about. This is what's at the heart of what we do. This is, Nature Connects, more people about, nature prescriptions, everything we're talking about, and the arts and the pledges in there. And, that is really, really great. I mean, obviously, you're all looking forward to that, and fingers crossed. But I do hope you get, I think I'm right in saying we've got some external support if required. Did I read that somewhere that we can go, you get some help from, I hope you're on your own with it, are you? Well done.
I'm not myself on my own, but we're working as a team. So we've got a working group across the authority. So individual project managers and officers from all of the directorates across the authority. So, but we also do have support from the Heritage Lottery Fund's programme manager. So she's meeting with us regularly to make sure we're on track.
I'm sure that's great. I mean, lot of businesses, they get consultants in and take a slice of everything you get. I mean, you're really earning your keep. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. David?
I'm particularly interested in 4.2, the Most Connected Heritage Lottery Fund. I think it's really exciting. It's got wonderful opportunities there. And I think there are hidden benefits there in terms of increasing footfall, visitor numbers into the park, and the whole economy of the park. As well, of course, as the health and well-being, getting more people walking and cycling and what have you. I think it's absolutely first class and particularly encouraging when Ellen tells us that the HLF are behind it as well. I think when you look at on page 50, the 6 points that are highlighted, the management plan outcomes, every one of those ticks what the National Park Authority is all about. Improving health and well-being and involvement by the public. And in particular, making it a place that's going to be sustainable financially, economically, and socially as well. So I wish you every success, having it first class.
Thank you, David. Christine?
Hi, Ellen. Yeah, obviously you've got a huge amount on your plate, so I stand with others who say well done on what you've been doing. But I just wanted to look at the table 1, really. I know obviously this financial year is great, but can you help me understand, are all the projects that you've listed included in that grey box looking ahead to next year? So even with all the great work that's underway, there's still quite a big gap between what we would like to see and where we're at the moment. Is there anything you see coming in from the external funding side of things to plug that gap? And could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Well, as I mentioned with the Heritage Lottery Fund, the 25, 26, 26, 27 would be the development phase year, so you get less money within that year. So we're looking at around 900,000 to spread over those 2 years, and then the every year after that would be where the actual main part of the grant will be the delivery. So we're looking more focused at meeting the target after then. With the 25-26 and on 26-27, there are opportunities with such as the landscape enhancement initiative, so we can go to them for funding as we do every year. But our main focus is, to be honest, on this Heritage Lottery Fund application, because, like David said, it meets every single outcome of the management plan. So everyone's efforts are sort of focused on that at the moment. But we always get pots of money, suddenly say, oh, come and apply to this, and, we jump at the chance because we've got lots of projects which are shovel ready that we can say, that matches that proposal. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
Thank you.
Chair, can I just?
Carry on.
I think, but given that, I don't see on our agenda that we're drilling down kind of into staffing issues and things, and it might be good to have a conversation subsequently. I know we've talked a bit about staff on permanent contracts or on temporary contracts, and obviously it's outside of Ellen's remit, but it would be interesting to understand more about the implications there, because if we're dropping our funding from the target by nearly £1 million for possibly more than a year, it will have an impact on staff retention. Anyway, for future conversation, okay. I think. Thank you.
I think with the change in government as well, it's quite hard to predict what will happen, because there's lots of things like the water restoration funding and other species recovery funding that we would usually go to, but we're not sure yet whether they're going to be continued. So we're just waiting for news on, the usual pots. But yeah.
Thanks, Ellen.
Okay.
Right. George?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this excellent report. Obviously, the more connected the Heritage Lottery Fund is absolutely fantastic proposal, and the amount of money we're talking about is significant, especially in comparison with the other projects that we are doing. So you mentioned it is ours. You mentioned that they told you that it's ours to lose. Are there any particular risks that you see that we might not get us there? And the other question is, do we know when we are going to hear back? And is it possible to let us know when that happens rather than waiting until the next FRASC meeting?
Yes, so we were just working on now actually the mechanisms of informing members. So we're going to keep it as a regular update, such as the members update training sessions. So we'll keep referring back to it at each meeting. So we should submit the application by the 21st of November, but we'll probably do it beforehand because we don't want to get to the deadline. And then we would hear in March. If the main risk is not meeting that deadline, so if we don't feel that we're ready and we don't have a really good quality application, which is my role, to make sure that we do, we would then go for the February deadline, so we would hear in June. So we would just keep, changing the deadline on our terms. We've got a year to apply, so we just need to make sure that it's the strongest application it can be before it goes in. So that's our focus.
And whether we submitted, say, for example, in the November deadline or the February deadline, it doesn't reduce the probability of them giving us a grant. So it's not that we've got a pot that will finish, but they would consider the application on its merit. And if the application is strong, the strongest possible, then they will grant us the funds regardless of whether it's November or February.
That's right, hopefully. So it's all to be assessed. It's not guaranteed funding, but the programme within the Heritage Lottery Fund that we're going into is the Landscape Connections Fund, which they just opened a couple of weeks ago. And that has 150 million to be given out to national parks and landscapes, so it's a specific pot for the likes of ourselves. So we would hope, because we actually submitted prior to that opening, and they've moved us into that programme, so that's quite a positive step for us that we're the first applicant. So we would be seen, by the UK board as, the first to apply for that application programme. So, that is quite a positive step for us. But it's, it will be assessed against other budget restraints that they may have, so we'll see.
And it's positive that you have this dialogue with them and conversation and feedback. We talked in the strategy meeting last week, I think, about this national park being transformational and has done a lot of things. And of course, if this is to materialise, then it is one of those truly transformational projects.
Yeah, that's one of the criteria of the fund, actually, is to be UK transformational. So we want to influence, things like the new GCSE that they're producing for natural heritage. We want to work with public health on nature prescriptions and how that should be rolled out alongside social prescribing, and also, working with government on a national basis, making sure that the national landscapes are sort of core to their purposes. So yeah, we're really enthusiastic about that.
Thank you. Fingers crossed.
That's okay.
Thank you very much, George. Jim, do you want to?
Thanks. It was just back to my current hobby horse of health and well-being. And I thank Tom for sort of giving a steer to that on the challenges of finding projects, match funding, and really getting that moving forward. I just wonder whether we do have that impetus, in the projects we're looking for. Do we have someone who really is focused on landing some of that? And I think my question, my slight wonder is whether we really understand our outputs of health and well-being, because I don't think it is the NHS that's probably our biggest target. I think that there's a huge amount of health and well-being output in the more connected project that we're looking at. I'm just not sure that we're actually kind of valuing that as part of those bids. But we have the trust, which is leading on some really great ideas and sort of trailblazing, if you like, that we could follow up. But I just think, the idea of landing a huge amount of money out of the NHS for health and wellbeing to a national park is pretty unlikely, to be honest. And I think it's quite a lot of years since we did our initial social return on investment study, and that was a bit of a groundbreaking first. But I think what that started to do for us, and what maybe we haven't followed up on as much as we could, is looking at the health and wellbeing output of all the things that we're doing, and measuring that or including it separately. And people, particularly, volunteers, visitors, footpaths, cycling, they all have a health and wellbeing benefit. And it's just understanding how we can capture some of that instead of chasing the NHS for money, which, when your old relatives need an intensive care bed, there's nothing more important to you, and it's really difficult to get out of that mindset into preventative health and well-being. So I take heart from Tom that we're going to really sort of focus on how we can include health and well-being in the bids that we're putting, not necessarily specifically, but as a component of them. And, I'll just leave it at that.
But any more, Malcolm?
Yeah, thanks, Harry. I was really interested in what you said about sort of the management arrangements you've got for keeping hold of this, you know, the team that you've got, because clearly, you know, as we are going to be ambitious and get more of these grants coming in, hopefully that's the expectation. It's important that that sort of structure is working well and working efficiently. The other thing that strikes me is that the more successful we are, the more difficult it is to sort of actually take a step back and say, given that there's a lot of money coming in from grants, and money from income, bit of money from the government, how much we actually are spending on the main topics of things that we do. And I think that's something that maybe we need to explore a bit. It is getting more complicated to say, you know, pick any particular area, say the Rangers or something like that, and how much money actually comes from, you know, the government grants for that, how much of our income goes into it, how much of the external funding goes into it. So life's getting more complicated and that kind of thing. So, but well done on what you're doing, and obviously this big grant you're talking about is great news. Just on a very detailed point though, this pollinators thing, you know, working with farmers and things, it just struck me reading that there's obviously a huge overlap with the sort of field work and things. How does that overlap sort itself out?
I don't know the specifics about that, but I do know that they have a specific project area, so you wouldn't be able to duplicate funding. So they're working on the south of the park with that, but I don't know how it would overlap with the
Okay, it's just a thought.
Yeah, I don't know.
And I suppose it just highlights the bigger thing, that there is interaction between all these various projects. You know, a number of them will be contributing to the same type of activity in different parts of the park, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And trying to keep a handle of that's quite tricky.
Yeah, especially with the Heritage Lottery, with the More Connected project, that is quite a big puzzle, you know, working out where the match funding would be coming from for that, because we need match funding for the project. But yeah, for example, we've got Reconnect, so we've had that 1.1 million from the other lottery, the National Lottery Community Fund, to work along the River Esk, but also More Connected will be including that as a project area, so it's making sure that we complement that money with, if we get the Heritage Lottery money. So it is, yeah, it's all huge sort of pieces of puzzles that we try to put together. Yeah.
And it makes it difficult, I think, for us as members to see what's going into a particular area. I mean, when we did the Land of Iron, fantastic work that was done, but it meant there was a lot of work was done in that area, or more work was done in that area than some of the other areas of the park, and that's obviously going to change over time as these big things come in. And it's just trying to keep a handle of what's going where, and is there any particular area that's missing out because of that sort of geographic distribution. You know.
Yeah, we're doing, as part of the More Connected project, we want to do an interactive map. So it would actually show, so you would hover over an area within the national park and it would show you what's going on in that area, not just the More Connected project, but other things that are going on as well within, you know, the funding that we and other partners get in. So you could see, you know, where's benefiting and where's not, where are the gaps and things. So like we did with the Arts Council project, that's exactly what we did. So we did a map of what provision is for artists around the national park and where are the gaps, and that's what we've gone to the Arts Council to say. There's a huge sort of oasis in the middle. Can we plough some Arts Council funding into that to meet that gap? So yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah. No, good, thanks.
Right, thank you very much. No more comments. Thank you, Alan. It's good to know we're the initial subscriber to this National Lottery Heritage Fund, is it? And everybody else has to do better. So you know, that's good. We'll be waiting for our second one to go in before anybody else gets any. But congratulations anyway, but keep up the good work and keep, yes, getting other staff from the authority to help you out and keep going, but thank you. The recommendation that members approve the contents of the report and agree the current work being done to secure external funding. Everybody happy with that? Thank you very much. We can move on to item 13, Corporate Risk Register.
Okay.
Ian,
thank you, Chair. Members, this is our quarterly update, and as you'll recall, at the last meeting we brought you a paper that focused specifically around information security. This time we're reverting to our normal report format. Work has continued on our information security actions, and that's progressing as we would expect it to. But just further evidence of the emphasis we're placing on that. We obviously spoke about that a little bit earlier in terms of this year's internal audit programme. Property assets, you'll all be aware of the major piece of work we're doing around our property, and the actions in the corporate risk register are progressing well. Pete spoke a lot earlier around where we were in terms of our budget. We obviously don't have any news at this stage around national park grants for future years, but we're mindful of financial pressures on the government, and our expectations with moderating accordingly. On the other bullet points, we've given some commentary to the work that we're undertaking. Slightly unusually, over recent years, we're proposing an in-year change to the risk level in relation to Woodsmith and Bolby mines. That started off as a medium, and we're recommending that we change that to a high risk. And the change to risk rating is specifically in response to the changes that Anglo-American have announced in slowing down the development phase at Woodsmith Mine. Now, that doesn't in any way affect the monies that are coming to us, and you'll all be aware that we have considerable insurance in terms of monies put aside for our Woodsmith Mine related works. But it's one that we definitely want to keep an eye on, and so we feel it would be appropriate for now to raise that risk rating. Others in there are progressing as expected, and Appendix 1, you've got the detailed analysis of progress against specific actions. So I'll stop there, Chair, and very happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Ian? Everybody happy being the first quarter and sorry, Malcolm.
Yeah, just briefly, just going to the targets and outcomes.
Yep.
I mean, we had that presentation by Campaign for National Parks fairly recently. And the main thing I took from that is all the numbers we were talking about were fairly old. Whereas, I mean, we've got monitoring information. The government have asked us for various bits of monitoring information. So why didn't they use some of that more up-to-date stuff? But it's also, I mean, I know in the past we've talked about the difficulty of getting all national parks to monitor exactly the same thing and all this sort of thing. But can you just give a general comment about where we are with that in terms of, I think it's the new thing that's come out from the government, isn't it?
Tom looks poised. I can poised because I can at least partly answer it. I think first thing, the field work for the CMP report was done last year. So prior to the publication of the Protected Landscapes Targets and Outcomes Framework, which was in January of this year. Some of the data, I think, goes up to 2020. There may well be one or two other data points that CMP used that's a little bit more recent than that, but some of it is a little bit more dated. Under the Protected Landscapes targets and outcomes framework, there's like I say, a series of 10 outcomes or targets which will be expected to monitor and measure ourselves against as targets for the place. And we received, all 44 protected landscapes received a data dump back in April from Natural England, relating to some of those, is incomplete, relating to I think 4 or 5 of those different targets, because most of the data is collected by Natural England or DEFRA. Challenges in the past have been cutting that to protect the landscape's boundaries, although there are aspects that already are done to that level. And some of the data hasn't been updated for some time. So triple SI condition, there's an ongoing programme in Natural England to assess protected sites around the country. I can't say what position ours are in the North York Moors, but it may well have been some years since they were last reviewed. So I would expect through the course of that exercise the quality and the clarity of the data according to those indicators to improve. And to be a little bit more timely, although I think there'll still be 1 or 2 areas where it isn't always as up to date as it might be.
Yeah. Okay. One, George.
Thank you, Chair. I think from my perspective, Ian, you mentioned the property risk during your presentation. Of course, it is in the papers. My only concern about it is that obviously we have not made a decision yet. And you mentioned about the importance of having a credible financial plan. I completely agree with that. You also talk about the failure of maintaining adequate offices, which you're right, it's important that we have adequate offices. However, I couldn't see anything there about the risks of proceeding with the current plan in terms of, for example, the costs involved, the fact that we have already spent a huge amount of money, time, resources, and focus of this authority before having the final credible plan. So I think that for the risk register, maybe going forward, it could be more balanced in terms of outlining the risks of both parts that we are considering at the moment, rather than only one of them.
Thank you, George. Going forward, I'm sure we'll get to know more in a couple of days' time. Any more comments? Right, well, the recommendation that members approve and proposed increase in risk category of the risk in the relation to the Woodsmith and Bowby mines, which basically is more the Woodsmith, and make any comments they wish to the remaining contents of the paper. Is everybody happy with that? Thank you. Okay, thank you. If we can move on to item 14, which is you again, Ian, health and safety.
Thanks again, Chair. Again, this is our quarterly update on health and safety. I'll briefly take you through the paper. You'll see there under sickness absence, our absence rate continues to remain reassuringly low. Since this paper was written, there's been a couple of updates on national data. The Chartered Institute for Personnel and Development has just released some numbers to say the average UK worker is off sick for just short of 8 days per annum. And also I've got some comparative data from other national park authorities. Please say that in terms of sickness absence, our numbers are the strongest of any of the other parks. In terms of the national comparison, we ought to be well below the national average because of the nature of what we do and so on. So I don't think we should pat ourselves on the back too much for that. But nevertheless, our numbers are low, and there are a number of good reasons for that, and we need to make sure we keep it that way. In terms of accidents and near misses in para 5.2, I've described. I'm not quite sure whether it's an accident or a near miss, but it was certainly a health and safety incident, and we've certainly used that to re-emphasise to our people when they're going out on sites the importance of understanding the site that you're going to and the risks that might be inherent in that site as opposed to the task that you're undertaking on there. So there's been some useful learning coming out of that. And we've referenced a couple of times as we've gone through the agenda the very pleasing uplift in the number of visitors to Danby Lodge. We had one or two teething troubles with the new play area, not least the surround that the contractor put around the play area, which left a tripping hazard, but we quickly were able to replace that with something that's far more suitable for its location. On other health and safety matters, a chemical called Agilox, which we and lots of organisations have been using as a herbicide for many years, and we've used it particularly for controlling bracken, hasn't been authorised for use in the UK this year, and that follows trends elsewhere in the world. What that does mean for us is that our control of bracken will be much more reliant on physical measures. So that does change around some of our risk assessments because there are risks from exposure to bracken spores. So we need to be careful about particular times of year when we undertake that work. We've spoken a number of times over recent years about the garage roof at Sawmill Lane, and a number of you will have seen that and know that it's beyond economic repair. We've recently had another building surveyor out to look at it as part of our ongoing management and making sure that we understand its current state. The report that we've had suggests that the roof is safe and fit for purpose for at least another 2 years, and there was a recommendation of installing another roof prop, which we've done. I specifically put that in because a number of you have asked to be kept up to date on that. So that's a mixed bag of health and safety items. But again, I'll stop there, Chair. I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ian. Any questions for Ian? Go on, John.
Thank you very much, Ian. Particularly, it's good to have near misses reported because it really helps us learn.
Yeah.
I know we're following you now with the lead on that on our meetings at home, so thank you for that. Just one thing is, if we have got an issue with the more physicality of bracken because of the spores, have we got a way that we can still make sure the bracken is dealt with, or is this meaning that bracken is being dealt with less?
No, we'll just deal with it at different times of the year. So it's really the summer months when the spores are at their height, and so work on bracken control will take place outside of the main summer months. And it also means we need to think about the personal protective equipment that we use when we're undertaking those tasks, both for paid staff and for volunteers.
Thank you.
Go on, Jim.
Trouble is, the summer months are when it's effective to control bracken, isn't it? You can't control bracken in the winter because it's not there.
Any more comments for Ian? I do believe glyphosates was mentioned, that we can use it, but it maybe isn't quite as good.
I think it's effective as a control. Whether you can use it is another matter.
Okay. You can use it if nobody sees. Right. Any more questions, comments? The recommendation, members, is that we note the contents of the report. Thank you very much, Ian. No, it wasn't part of the original business, but we are now going into private session, if that's okay. Thank you, Max.
Just wait for Judith to